I'm Mary Hunt at WATER, the Women's Alliance for Theology, Ethics, and Ritual. I'm here with Diane New, who is the other co-director, and Vera Lugosi, who is our intern this season. And we appreciate her work on IT today. I want to welcome all of you to WATER and to let you know that Dr. Darla Schumm is with us, and I will introduce her shortly. We will conclude this program at the top of the hour, which will be 2 o'clock here on the East Coast, with the Zoom open for continued conversation for those who wish. But respecting the schedules of everyone, we will try to have our content and business done by 2 o'clock. So we want to respect everyone's schedules. We at WATER begin our programs with the land acknowledgement. Join me in this, please. This is something we have incorporated into all of our programs to remind ourselves of why we do what we do and what we need to do more of, given the systemic injustice against Indigenous and other people of color in this country. A land acknowledgement is a beginning, not an end, a time to reflect on our history and commit to justice making. The WATER office here in Silver Spring, Maryland, is on Indigenous land that is the traditional and contemporary land of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples. We acknowledge the trauma and injustice toward Indigenous people and other people of color that is so deep in U.S. culture and history. We join in efforts to eradicate that injustice and to make reparations for the genocide involved. WATER's work, whether intellectual, spiritual, or liturgical, is aimed at bringing about social justice. So for just a collective quiet moment, consider the Native people on whose land you sit. Feel free to put their names in the chat if you wish, and we'll just take a moment of silence to do that. I invite us all to spare a moment to give thanks to the many immigrants who have come so bravely to this country, especially recently those from Somalia, who were branded as garbage by the US president. There are simply no words to undo such gratuitous cruelty and stupidity, but our silence together for just a moment can be our rejection of such scandal. Let us just share in another moment of silence, holding in our hearts the people of Somalia. Thank you. WATER's work brings feminist women of spiritual values and intellectual work to efforts for social change. Our hope is that by socializing the resources of feminist womanist work and religion, we spread tools and energy for justice. In light of the current U.S. administration's disruptive, destructive, chaotic, and globe-shaking policies, it is more crucial than ever that we create opportunities like this for learning, conversation, and resistance. You can be sure that WATER will protect these spaces and expand them in the months ahead, come what may. Feel free to join us and to suggest other topics or speakers, books we might fruitfully explore. The stakes are higher than I have experienced in my lifetime, and they seem to get higher by the day, with so many issues largely brushed under the rug, as the list of horrors grows, especially for those who are poor, disabled, immigrants, or people of color. I remind you that we are recording this session, that if you'd like to turn your captions on, you can go to the CC on the bottom right-hand side of your screen and hit that little caret and go to show captions, and then you'll have the captions coming through. And also, if there are other needs, please let us know. I will begin our program by introducing our speaker, Dr. Darla Schumm, and her book, and then she will explore her work with us for 20 or 25 minutes, and then the floor will be open for question and discussion until the top of the hour, which will be 2 p.m. Eastern Time, when we will close officially. The Zoom will remain open after that for conversation as long as people wish. So please listen and enjoy. We'll take notes, or we may ask Darla to share with us any notes she'd like to, and the notes along with the video of this session will be on our website. You can re-listen by going to the website www.waterwomensalliance.org, look under programs and teleconferences, and they're all there for your use. We will send you the written notes and the link to the video in the next week. Please feel free to share these resources and continue the conversation among your colleagues in a variety of settings. Let me begin by introducing Darla Schumm, Associate Provost at Hollins University in Virginia. It used to be Hollins College, now it's Hollins University. I'm delighted to have you share your wisdom with us, Darla, and I'm shameless about promoting your book because I think it is a welcome contribution to the literature about religion and disability studies. I'm holding it up now for everyone to see. It's a wonderful volume, Healing Ableism, Stories about Disability and Religious Life, Darla Schumm, published by Rutgers University Press. I'm shamelessly hawking this book because it is the stuff of which new ways of living will emerge. According to her Holland's biography, Darla, quote, received her BA in interdisciplinary studies with concentrations in history, psychology, and women's studies at Goshen College in Indiana, a good Mennonite school. Her MA in social ethics from the Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, a beautiful place, and her PhD in religion, ethics, and society from Vanderbilt University. Her current research focuses on the intersections between religious studies and disability studies. She's the co-editor of Disability and World Religions, an Introduction, a textbook on world religions and disability, a very important volume, by the way. Water has had many Mennonite connections, Darla, over the years, starting with Cindy Lapp, who
Yeah.
will be here later this afternoon just by coincidence for a cup of tea. She worked with us for years and is a dear friend. And we've included several Mennonite voluntary service people in our panoply of wonderful water interns. So that's Goshen. Diane New and I met in Berkeley, so I'm always sure that the best of the best go there to study. And I can see the Berkeley influence in your creativity and openness. Vanderbilt, I know less about, but heaven knows I know the good people, especially Emily Towns et al., who made that a real happening place.
Mhm.
We met, Darla, when we were both chairs of status committees for the American Academy of Religion, you for people with disabilities in the profession, and I doing the same work with the status of LGBTQI persons in the professions. I knew immediately that I was working with a person of solid academic preparation and excellent administrative skills, not a common combination in the religious academy. She understated. Here's what we at Water said about your book when we listed it with on our what we're reading suggestions. I quote, most people encounter disability at some point in their lives, either in their own bodies or through a friend or loved one. Religious teachings and metaphors are often used to explain the presence of disability, but rarely do we hear the voices of people living with disabilities reflecting on their experiences of God, faith, or religious life. Darla explores the stories of people with disabilities who struggle with the human challenges of faith, doubt, exclusion, and inclusion, injustice, and justice. She invites readers to reflect on the experiences of people with disabilities in religious communities and organizations. She argues that it is not disability that needs healing, it is ableism that needs healing. Accessible love is her insightful suggestion for the way forward. Further, in my comment on the book jacket, I wrote, and I quote, careful, candid, comprehensive analysis grounded in interviews with disabled people opens new paths. This deftly written book is theology at its most useful. Unquote. I stand behind all of that. I'm indebted to you for your insights and especially for your candor. You call things as you experience them, whether in the professional arena or with friends. I appreciate a theologian who has the guts to say that communion is vexed and fraught, both in its concept and design. I appreciate your good ideas for moving forward, and there are very few people who have lifted the term badass to a theological um, term of art. I'm happy to share you, Darla, my friend, with a wider water group today. Thanks for the book, and thanks for being here. Darla.
Wow, thank you, Mary. I feel like we could just stop right now and it would be a great, successful talk, but we will press on. Mary and I, as she said, have known each other for quite a number of years because of our work on the status committees, but it wasn't until the American Academy of Religion conference a year ago, so 2024, that we actually met in person, and a testament to Mary's openness and graciousness. When we actually met in person, we realized that it was the first time. I felt like I had known you for many years, which I had, but I felt like I'd spent time in the same room with you, which I had not because of COVID. So It's really my pleasure to be here today with all of you, and especially to be doing a water talk. From my early days in graduate school, I have known about water, I have followed water, and so I kind of feel like I've arrived to be presenting a water talk. So thank you all. And when I present, I often preface it by saying that in presenting, I'm also um, demonstrating or performing disability. For those of you who have not read the book, I am blind. And so I meant to ask you, Mary, and I forgot, so I'll ask you now. When I hit about 20 minutes, if you want to let me know if I'm still going, just to give me a quick time check. It's a little harder for me to quote unquote keep an eye on the time. So I would be grateful if you just give me a little interrupt me and just give me a little time check. So,
Will do. Thank you.
all
And
right.
if I could just put a parentheses, um, you and I actually met in person at the astonishingly wonderful event that was held
Yes.
in honor of Judith
Yes.
Plaskow.
Yes.
And since we are both Judith Plaskow groupies, I
Yes.
just want to announce to you that she's here.
Oh, Judith, hi. Yes, I
Hi,
am
Judith.
a Judith Plaskow groupie, and that is
Yeah.
Hi,
exactly the
Darla.
event where we met. Hi, Judith. I'm so
Judith,
delighted
I didn't
that
mean to
you
embarrass you or
are
take you away
here.
from your lunch, but I just wanted Darla
No,
to know
no,
that
no.
it was at your event. This was a highlight of the
Yeah,
AAR for the decade, which was the celebration of Judith Plaskow, who had been inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. And Darla and I met at that event that evening. Judith, you'll remember it very well. But I just wanted Darla to know you were here.
yeah,
Anyway, Darla,
yeah.
back to you. Sorry.
All right, great. Thank you. Um, so when I was 8 years old, I was diagnosed with a life-changing disability. My parents and I spent the better part of a year trekking back and forth from northern Indiana, where we lived, to the University of Michigan, where I went through a barrage of tests where doctors were trying to determine why I could no longer read the blackboard from my seat in the front row of my second grade classroom. My my disease, as it was called, was is very rare, and so it presented a pretty significant challenge for the doctors to actually diagnose. At one appointment, I was examined by over 25 doctors and medical students. It was a day-long exam. And at the end of that day, my parents were told that either I had a brain tumor that would kill me within a year or so, that I had a disease that would cause me to go completely blind, or that it might be some other yet to be determined outcome. As you can imagine, this was a very distressing day for my parents. When we got back to Indiana, a group of my parents' friends, people from our Mennonite church, where my father was then the minister, came over to our house, laid hands on me, and prayed for my healing. A couple weeks later, my parents and I traveled back to the University of Michigan to receive my final diagnosis. The diagnosis was a form of juvenile macular degeneration. At that time, they called it Stargardt's. Since then, I have been told that Leber's congenital amaurosis, say that 10 times fast, is a more apt diagnosis, but they're both essentially the same, a genetic disorder that results in juvenile macular degeneration. I was legally blind at the time of the diagnosis. And while my vision has degenerated some from that point, that initial diagnosis, I do still have very minimal vision, but I describe myself as functionally blind. That day, when I was 8 years old and we received the diagnosis, the doctor, Dr. Falls, looked at me and very clearly said, "Young lady, there is nothing you cannot do in your life other than drive a car." So my parents and I went home that day elated. We had gotten the less bad of a selection of not great diagnoses, and it felt like a win. We stopped at the homes of what I now refer to as the prayer warriors, the people who had laid hands on me and prayed for me. We stopped at their homes to tell them the great news. I wasn't going to die. I probably wasn't going to be totally blind. And I should be able to live a full and quote unquote normal life. The two responses that I got that day, one from Dr. Falls, who was very clear that I was the same person the day before the diagnosis as I was the day after the diagnosis, and the response of the prayer warriors who, without exception, asserted that I had been healed as a result of their prayerful intervention, set the stage for the rest of my personal and professional life. Although at 8 years old, of course, I didn't realize it at the time. But really, my life since that point has been living within, finding, struggling with, celebrating the tension between what the rational medical world told me and what those faithful, albeit I would say now in retrospect, somewhat misguided prayer warriors told me. As I grew older, got to know more and more people with disabilities and started talking with them about their lives and experiences living with disability, I came to realize that my experiences really overlapped with a lot of what they were experiencing. This probably doesn't sound particularly revolutionary or surprising, but you would be amazed at how infrequently in my childhood and adolescence, and even through graduate school, quite frankly, I encountered other people with apparent disabilities. So when I started having these conversations, it was pretty earth-shaking for me in good ways. Eventually, I started thinking about writing a book. And so, what I ended up doing when I started the book project for what is now Healing Ableism, I interviewed people with disabilities about their lives, but in particular, I interviewed them about their experiences in religious communities and organizations. Because as I continued to scrutinize my own life and my own reflections about disability, religion, religious teachings, practices, rituals, and communities kept surfacing as some of the most powerful moments where I experienced ableism. Patricia Hill Collins, in her groundbreaking work, Black Feminist Thought, discusses the controlling images of Black women, which are negative representations and stereotypes of Black women, like the mammy, the hot mama, the welfare mother, that are leveraged to justify the ongoing suppression and subordination of Black women. I ask in Healing Ableism, borrowing from Hill Collins, what are the dominant controlling images of people with disabilities? Over and over and over again in my interviews, two controlling images rose to the surface that also resonated with my own experience. And those are the controlling images of the sinner and the saint. So, the sinner. The sinner controlling image asserts that people with disabilities are disabled or sick because of sin. I have heard many, many times from strangers, friends, ministers, other religious leaders, if you just pray hard enough, your sins will be forgiven. And in Christian contexts, Jesus will heal you. I hope this sounds outrageous to you. It feels outrageous to those of us who hear these messages. But of course, at the heart of the sinner controlling image is the belief that disability is a result of sin, that it is a problem, a failure, a moral lack in an individual impaired body. There has to be a reason or an explanation for disability, and that reason is sin. Now, in non-Christian contexts, there are we can find similar patterns, but the language and theology, of course, is different. For example, in Buddhism, I've been told by a Buddhist or two that karma is the result, karma, which is action, is the cause or the explanation for disability. So you've done something wrong in a previous life to warrant disability in this life. The saint controlling image, while seemingly at the opposite end of the spectrum, and I'll talk about that in a minute, it functions similarly to the sinner controlling image, but of course, for the saint controlling image, the messages are a little bit different. For the saint controlling image, I frequently hear, "Oh my goodness, you're so amazing. You're so wonderful. I could never do what you do. You are a special person who teaches the rest of us how to live with disability." Now, as I say in the book, as Mary said, I'm not afraid to speak my mind. So, as I say in the book, those people aren't wrong. Yes, I'm remarkable. but not necessarily because of my disability, and neither am I any more remarkable really than anybody else. Certainly no one else on this call, I'm confident. Um, but this is another type of othering people with disabilities. Again, there's this distinction between able-bodied and disabled-bodied, and the disabled-bodied are saintly moral exemplars for their religious communities. While it may appear as though the sinner and saint controlling images rest on opposite ends of the spectrum, less than on the one hand, better than on the other hand, I argue that they are remarkably similar. And I identify what I call four problematic parallels between the sinner and saint controlling image. So I'll talk through those really quickly, just doing a time check, and then get to my proposal that Mary referenced in her introduction, which is accessible love. So, the problematic parallels with the sinner and saint controlling images. The first one is that whether cast as saint or sinner, disability is always located squarely in the impairment of the individual body and fails to consider the social, religious, cultural structures and systems that discriminate, exclude, and minimize access and belonging for people with disabilities. Secondly, whether cast as sinner or saint, these controlling images always distinguish a stark us-them dichotomy between the able-bodied and the disabled-bodied. This is what we often talk about as othering, right? So there's an other against which I must be judged. And for many people, not everyone, but for many people with able bodies, it's often a relief to have an other against which you can measure yourself because it allows you to feel superior, normal, and particularly when it comes to ability and disability. Third, whether cast as sinner or saint, disability is always understood and defined as a state of suffering. So the sinner suffers, needs to be forgiven of sins and healed. The saint suffers, but is admired for their heroic suffering. But in either case, disability is understood as a negative state of suffering. And finally, whether cast as sinner or saint, disability is always met with pity. So I'm sorry that you're a sinner. I'm sorry that you are a heroic or noble sufferer, but I feel pity towards you because of the state of your disability. In all of these problematic parallels, the solution that is typically offered is healing, prayer, or some kind of intervention, be it medical or spiritual, that brings about healing. As my title, I was going to say suggests, I think it states it pretty directly. Um, I argue in the book that, in fact, it is not disability that needs to be healed. It is the ableism that confronts us in many, if not all, of our institutions, communities, and organizations that needs to be healed. I make this argument not to minimize any one person's desire for literal physical healing. Sometimes that happens, and I don't want to gloss over the very real challenges of living with disability, illness, chronic pain, and the many other forms of disabling conditions. But for many of us who live with disabilities, literal physical healing is neither possible nor the goal. I never wake up in the morning wishing for physical healing. As I say over and over in the book, I've got a great life, and there's very little, if anything, that I would change about it. So I argue that it's ableism that our religious communities need to focus on healing, and that they need to stop thinking quite so much about how to cure disability or even about what the causes of disability are. I offer accessible love as one avenue for healing ableism. The thing about accessible love is that it is hard to define. It's not a formula or an XYZ do this and that's accessible love. Accessible love is action in motion. It's not stable or stagnant. And it requires that every member of a community participate in figuring out what accessible love means and looks like in their particular context. So, at its most basic core, accessible love combines a set of radical beliefs and practices. It is the radical belief that every body, all bodies are worthy and valued, deserving of being included and having access. It is a set of radical practices that ensures that everybody, all bodies, are granted inclusion, access, justice, and belonging. Accessible love addresses the four problematic parallels that I talked about a moment ago. It it erases the us them distinction. It calls all community members into action in motion and resists the idea that disability is a problem for an individually impaired, flawed body, but asserts that disability is an opportunity for building just and equitable communities. Accessible love changes our understanding of disability as a state of suffering and acknowledges that disability is one form of many beautiful forms of human variation. And accessible love finally dismisses any impulse towards pity for the other who is in an embodied state, disabled or less able to do certain functions. Accessible love is context driven. So, again, for communities, religious and otherwise, because I very much believe that accessible love can apply in many community contexts, not just religious organizations, but educational, maybe even in a business context. The only prescription that accessible love asserts is that communities work together to discover and create outcomes that bring about justice for all bodies, be they disabled or otherwise. Accessible love is a call to action for religious communities to do better, to address the fundamental discriminatory attitudes and practices so prevalent in so many of our religious communities. And I think I will leave it there because as I told Mary at the outset, my favorite part is the Q&A, and I'd really love to hear your thoughts and your questions and for us to be able to have a conversation together. So thank you.
Darla Schumm, thank you so very much. And just to say, you came in on the button of 25 minutes, which is
Look at
the
that.
outside. See, I don't know. I don't know. I think you have, I don't know how you did it, but there you go. The book is Healing Ableism. I'm holding it up, shamelessly hawking it because it's so smart. Stories about disability and religious life, published by Rutgers University Press. Make a great holiday gift for your thoughtful friends. Something to really dig into. This concept of accessible love, and particularly it being context specific, is a real challenge. And I think that gives a lot of people some space to move in terms of doing what needs to be done here. This is a water talk, and so it does have a water Q&A, a water discussion. And I'm going to open the discussion now to anyone who would like to make a comment. I ask you only to be brief, to say who you are and where you're speaking from, or in a word of explanation if you want, just so that we get to know people better, but err on the side of brevity. And we will take comments using the buttons at the bottom, if you can, the react button that will allow you to raise your hand. And if you do not want to use the react button to raise your hand, just put your hand up in the air as I am right now, waving my hand furiously in front of my camera. That old grade school trick that we all learned. So I want to open the floor now for those who would like to make a comment to Darla Schumm about this really, I think, marvelous book, Healing Ableism, Stories about Disability and Religious Life. The floor is open, and I will take the first person with a question. I have a list of, as I told Darla, I have 10 questions of my own, so we will not run out of things to discuss, but I want to open it to all of our friends and colleagues. This floor is open. Barbara Andelson first, and then Deb Amatuli. Barbara Andelson, Christian ethicist, longtime colleague through the Society of Christian Ethics. Go ahead, Barbara.
A graduate of Vanderbilt also a long time ago, so Darla and I
Oh,
have a background in common. This
great.
is just something I'm thinking over. I have two kinds of disabilities. One that's on my mind these days because I have more difficulty walking distances and I use a walker, and that's fairly recent. I am 79. I would say that started 4 or 5 years ago. But I also, and it jogged me because I have difficulty taking notes in something like this because I have a learning disability. And those are disabilities that people can't see,
Mhm.
but I've had that since I was, well, probably since I was in the second grade. And I don't have the conventional type, letters don't jump around for me, sounds. confuse me.
Hmm.
So, as I was taking notes during this talk, there were times when the spelling of a common word that any of you could have jotted this note down with no difficulty. I can't get your next thought because I'm still trying to decide how to spell distressing, for example.
Mhm.
So this is just a way of saying I think the particularities of disabilities also are important.
Mhm. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And I talk about that in the book about the fact that even defining disability is a challenge because, as you so beautifully illustrated, Barbara, um, there's so much variety within that category we call disability, and one word can't capture the reality of what it means for millions of people. And I focused when I was interviewing people, I only interviewed people who self-identified as living with a physical disability. So I didn't interview people who have cognitive disabilities or developmental or learning disabilities. I didn't interview caregivers of people with disabilities. But all of those voices, I think, are critical to this conversation about how we heal ableism. I just needed to focus. But yes, the particularity, and that's why I maintain that accessible love has to be context driven, because what one or a group of people might need in terms of access, for example, will be really different from what another individual or group of people needs. And so that's why it can't just be a one and done. It has to be a constant conversation, attention to the needs, as well as, the gifts of people in your community at any given time.
Thank you so much. And I would just mention that Barbara is professor emerita from Fordham University in ethics. One of our
Right.
longtime colleagues, highly regarded work in ethics. Let me turn then to Deb Amatuli, who has her hand up. Go ahead, Deb.
Darla, thank you so very much. Many of your elements of your story coincide with mine. I was diagnosed at 14 after a month of people trying to figure out what it was also.
Mm.
And I was told by most of the doctors and all of the folks, the nuns and everybody, that, oh, well, you'll just be in a wheelchair the rest of your life. Thank God. My father said, "Oh no, you won't." Had a friend that was a chiropractor and has did work with me. Anyways, I didn't end up in a wheelchair till I was in my 50s, and now I'm 76, and I still have some mobility, though I'm in a wheelchair most of the time. But I want to thank you for bringing out that one person that gave you a positive view
Mhm.
of that you were no different, that you could do anything that you wanted to do was so very important, because
Mhm.
I've had the saint and the sinner stuff too. And
Mhm.
it's so good to have that love. So thank you so much.
Mhm. Thank you. Yeah, it was I was visiting my parents at Thanksgiving, and the book just came out a week or so before Thanksgiving. And so, of course, we were all talking about it. And it was really interesting to hear my parents reflecting on what that doctor said to me, because I think it also very much impacted how they parented me, which was they placed well, I mean, they were parents. They placed limitations on me, just like all parents do, but not because I was disabled. And they were talking about how important it was for them to hear the doctor say to me that there was nothing I couldn't do, because that really helped them in terms of their own, we all worry about those of us who have kids, we worry about our kids no matter what. And if you're parenting a child with a disability, there's an added layer of concern, I suppose. But my parents also just heard that message, took it to heart, and I count myself very fortunate for having had that doctor. I mean, this was in the early 70s. I'm trying to think. Yeah. Early to mid 70s. So there wasn't a lot of wokeness about disability at that time. So,
Yeah, thanks. And in the book, you talk about your parents letting you ski and do other things that you really weren't quite sure. Yeah, I,
which
I
were
mean, God
probably
bless
not
them.
so smart.
You can't say they held you up. I mean,
Nope.
that just took
Nope.
my breath away. Let's move on. Thanks very much, Deb, for your comment and for your own insights. I'm going to move to Sheila Curran in Dublin, Ireland. Go ahead, Sheila.
Thank you very much for your talk, which I find really interesting, even though it's something that I would have fought for as well, because I had an uncle who was deaf and an aunt with Down syndrome.
Uh,
I'm in Ireland, and they were from a period in Ireland where people were kept hidden,
uh,
and and also there was derogatory terms and terms of how people with Down syndrome were viewed,
mm,
how people who were deaf were viewed. And both of them, they're now both deceased, but both of them had my grandmother, they were my mother's only siblings. And I'm from a Catholic background, but it was always, this is the cross that God has given you to bear.
mhm,
And nowadays, because people can choose whether to have a child that is diagnosed with having a disability before they're born, that I remember my mother said, will there not be other people like them now, because people want a perfect society and
mhm,
perfect human beings, and there's a perfection to what
mhm,
human beings fall into. And I find that something really scary to think about.
mhm,
While the challenges, not to take away from the challenges that
mhm.
people have, like you rightly put in place, but how religious language has fed into that perfectionism.
Yes.
As when we say we're all made in the image and likeness of God, neither color nor sexual orientations nor all of these things, like there was a perfection to which we think God has or is or whatever it might be, that all these are deviants, they're deviant to what the perfection world is. And I just wonder what your thoughts about that are, having fought long and hard. Thankfully, things have changed somewhat in Ireland. Not a pile if you were to listen to some of them on the fight that you're on, but they have changed somewhat. But I'm just
Mhm,
interested in that very perfect thing, and
mhm.
how the other flip side, no matter what disability you have, is the deviant or the misfit or whatever word you want to put on it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Sheila, I think we could probably talk for the next couple hours about the many really important issues your comments and questions have raised. And there are probably three more books in what you just brought up. Certainly, I think there's the issue of social engineering and eugenics, the attempt to eradicate disability. And I could talk for days about my absolute terror of that movement and where we might end up. I think the more theological question that you bring up about the perfection and created in the image of God. I talk about this also in the book, and I really talk about two different responses to this question about being created in the image of God. The first one, I would imagine some of you are familiar with the work of Nancy Eastland, who really was the first theologian to write a disability liberation theology. Her book from 1992, I believe, called The Disabled God, was very much a Christian theology. And she wrote about the post-crucifixion Jesus, pre-resurrection, who still had the wounds and scars and marks on his body from the crucifixion. And she proposed that image as a very powerful rethinking of God and what it meant to be created in the image of God. The other person who I write about is a friend of mine, Rabbi Lauren Tuckman, who is the first female blind rabbi. So there were blind male rabbis before Lauren. There were male and female rabbis with other disabilities, but Lauren is the first female American female blind rabbi. And she talks about being created in the image of God, and the very radical idea of being created in the image of God, and how nowhere in the Hebrew Bible does God put limitations on who that includes. So if we're created in the image of God, that means everyone, everybody. And she really fleshes that theological understanding out in her own speaking and work. And I find it a really powerful framework for thinking about how the image of God, if it is radical inclusion, which is the phrase that Rabbi Tuckman uses, then we have to take that seriously. And it means every single one of us. And it really pushes us to expand our understanding of the divine. And I don't want to anthropomorphize the divine, because I think God, or the divine, however one thinks about it, is far beyond what we can envision. But that's how I have really been thinking about what radical inclusion is in terms of being created in the image of God. Thank you for your comments. There's so much more to say, but
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Sheila, and thank you, Darla. I'm going to ask Lori Wright Gary to have the next question, and then I'm going to conclude us formally with the announcements of the Next Water programs, and then I'm going to move us seamlessly into the post meeting moment of a few moments to talk about a couple of other things, including the one I would like to get to, which is the relationship between what you've been saying today and what Teresa Smallwood said 2 weeks ago about violent rhetoric in the pulpit.
yeah.
So I'd like to get your thoughts on that. So we will go ahead with Lori Wright Gary, and welcome to you, Lori, and great to have you with us as always.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you for having Darla here. I've learned a lot, and your book reminds me of actually Mary Hunt's article that I use when you challenged heterosexism and patriarchy, and she kind of did the same thing by throwing the argument on its head to say women
Yeah.
aren't the problem, and you're saying the same thing. Disability is not the problem; it's the people, the ableist people. And I was wondering, do you address or talk about Elizabeth Schussler-Fiorenza's idea of curiarchy and the idea that one group is being seen as another? Or do you talk at all about like intersectionality of Kimberly Crenshaw and just how there are many types of oppression and just that, I mean, it's the oppressors that are the problem. And I know that all of us can be oppressed and oppressors, but I was just wondering if you spoke about this in your book. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So I don't actually use Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza's work in this book, although I admire her work greatly. But yeah, I do talk about Crenshaw and intersectionality and how I mean you nailed it on the head, right? It's a great flipping the concept or the the question, turning it upside down or on its head or however you want to put it. But yes, acknowledging that in addressing ableism, we must always be attentive to the fact that few people who experience oppression, injustice, rarely experience it in just one narrow way, but that there are always these, or often these intersecting identities. And so in addressing ableism, we also need to attend to questions of race and class and gender and heterosexism and transphobia. Because if we're only addressing ableism, we're still part of the problem. So, yeah. And again, that's where I hope accessible love as a concept can be utilized to really think about what I call justice, just communities, creating just communities across the board, not just for people with disabilities, but for all persons who are excluded from those communities.
Thanks, Lori. Thanks, Darla. Darla, just one thing that caught my attention in the book on this topic was where you talked about the logic of substitution, which
Yeah.
is a mistake made by many people for many decades of substituting Black for disabled or brown for queer, something like that. And I think that pointing that out is enormously helpful for showing how intersectionality demands better and puts to rest any cheap sleights of hand.
Yeah.
And so I think there's more to talk about here, but I think you do that very well in the book in a way that I found persuasive. Let me thank you once again for this book and for the welcome contribution it is to the large conversation about intersection of disability and religion, and also each of those on their own terms. I'm personally persuaded that some of the most exciting theology is emerging from conversations about disability at the moment. And
Yeah.
that's new under the sun, in my experience, at least in the academic study of religion. I think, of course, of Julia Watts-Belcher's book, Loving Our Own Bones, for which the WATERtalk is up on our website. And taken together, I think your book and Julia's book function as bookends for a shelf of writing that opens theology and more broadly human experience to its full range. And so if I have one of those books on one side of the shelf and one of those books on the other, yours and Julia's, I think that in between there's an enormous amount of literature emerging to which we need to pay enormous amounts of attention. So I thank you for offering new food for thought and some good strategies for healing ableism. Again, one last shameless pitch for the book. I'm holding up the cover. Healing Ableism, Stories About Disability and Religious Life. I highly recommend you get it, folks. Use it in your study groups, in your classes, for your own work. And Sheila, take it across the pond. In the meantime, I remind you that all water programs are free. They're open to everyone. Your donations are needed and welcome, but our aim is to socialize resources. We have found, and it happens, that those who can donate do so generously, so that we have always, or have in recent decades, made water programs available to everyone without charge. We believe that if we share among us, there's enough. I repeat, if we share among us, there's enough. 40 plus years later, it continues to be the case at Water that if we share among us, there's enough. And thanks to all of you, especially Darla, for sharing so generously today. So with that, I wish you good holidays and look forward to seeing you in 2026. And now we will pick up the conversation after this formal closing. We will pick up the conversation just for a few more minutes with you, Darla, if we might. And of course, I know you have other obligations, but the floor will stay open for those who'd like to stay on. I'd like to just go back to this question that I intimated before, which is the question of how violent rhetoric works. And I'm very taken by Teresa Smallwood's conversation with us a couple of weeks ago about violent rhetoric in the pulpit and how it is used. She also did a kind of ethnographic study, how it's used against LGBTQIA people. And I'm beginning to see that the healing narratives that you've talked about, however well-intentioned, can have that same impact and might well fit into her category of violent rhetoric. What do you think about that? And are there any texts that simply ought to be left aside in this regard, that are so egregious in their bald approach to healing and so negative in terms of how we move from the individual to the collective responsibility to heal ableism? Are there texts that ought to be left aside? I don't need them by chapter and verse, but just in your own judgment, what's your sense?
Great question, Mary. And so I have a couple of answers or thoughts about this. So I'm not a huge fan, as you know, of the healing narratives in the Christian Gospels, because as I write about, any time in the canonical text, anytime Jesus encounters a person with a disability, he heals them. So while he doesn't ever straight out say, oh, you're disabled, you can't be a part of my community. That is the message that I think is being communicated through those stories. So there's this quote that I use all the time. It's getting, I mean, people who hear me talk frequently are getting tired of it, but and I'm not going to remember it verbatim, but the gist of it, it's from an Australian disability activist, excuse me, and the gist of it is just that, you know, people with disabilities might have been better off for 2,000 years if Jesus had said to one of them, your life is perfect the way it is, and instructed the onlookers or the able-bodied people in the crowd to go out and work for a world free of discrimination. So again, it's that idea of we don't need to heal the disability. We need to get out into the world and heal the ableism. Although, of course, that those words aren't found in the, well, that sentiment isn't found in the Christian Gospels or in the Christian texts. So I would very much agree that there's a violence, there's an erasure that happens in those healing narratives that I find highly problematic, and that I certainly, growing up in a Mennonite church, hearing those stories, I think that contributed to my own sense of disability as a problem, my own sense of what what happened? Why did this happen to me? What did I do wrong? Why can't I be healed? All those questions. Having said that, one of the things I try to do in the book is to lift up contradictory voices, um, and include voices that don't necessarily agree with me and my interpretation of those healing narratives. And one in particular who comes to mind is a blind Methodist minister who, when I talked to him about these healing narratives, said, I said, how do you deal with this when you're preaching? What do you do with it? And he said, I run to those narratives because I have a different interpretation. I think they're about restoring a community and bringing all kinds of people into the community of believers, and that it's not about literal physical healing, but about the social healing, and that the quote unquote disability or quote unquote problem for the person being healed is that they're isolated from the community, not that they have a physical disability. So that's a different interpretation, a different way of thinking about it. But I still see the healing narratives as forms of violence. Now, should they be eliminated? I don't know. I don't know. I think it's a bigger question that I struggle with, beyond just the healing narratives, but there's a lot of crap in the Bible that is problematic. But it tells us something about those communities and maybe offers some windows into how we might deal with some of the crap in our own world. So I think I'm a little less, I don't have as confident of an answer about what we do with those texts, but I do find them really problematic. That's kind of a rambly answer, but
Well, no, it's a very generous answer, I must say, and it has certainly been the practice in many emerging forms of theology to bracket certain texts, whether it was feminist theology, black theology, whatever, to bracket certain texts and certainly not invite them to be used on a regular basis. Is there
okay.
anybody else who won't sleep tonight if they don't get to ask their question or make their comment? That would be the priority I would put on this, given Darla's crunch time here. Anybody else? Oh.
I just had about the hidden narratives when you have
Jill
places like
Karen again.
you have Lourdes or healing places, that people have that notion that this miracle is going to happen to them. And, as you say, in terms of the misconceptions sometimes about maybe the more inclusivity of what healing is about. Is it about that the sick person, the disabled, or is it the healing that I need healed because it's my attitude? Uh, and I once accompanied, when I was very young, a blind person in Lourdes when I believed a lot of this stuff when I was very young. And all I remember was Lourdes is a shrine in France. I don't know, it's a Catholic shrine, and where Our Lady was supposed to have appeared to a young girl. But the blind person couldn't see the grotto at the time. I was very young, I was 17. But all I remember asking the guard, could she touch it? She touched the rock because she couldn't see. And we went in. And I remember, really wishing, because people talked about people getting healed at this thing. And I remember saying to her, I don't know what this will do for you, but we can touch, they're allowing us to go into this thing. What I never forgot, she turned around and she said, I'm not looking to see again. I'm looking to have peace to accept what I cannot change.
Mm-hmm.
And if I get this from this, I will be better, and so will everybody be around me. And
Mm-hmm.
I never forgot, because it was the first person that changed my perception about what I thought this person was looking for, this kind, and
Mm-hmm.
she came for a time of peace, which she felt she was getting something, just being in the environment of, whatever it was. But I remember just that sense of what you perceive the person wanting to
Yeah.
be, that thing
Yeah.
of being healed, and this miracle that was going to come in a flash of light, and that narrative that was given when I was 17. I think you just hit on, what does it mean to be healed? What does it mean in
Yeah.
terms I've grown in a very different way to understand. But she taught me that thing, that her thing wasn't to change her disability, but it
Yeah.
was peaceful acceptance for others around her. So just was.
Yeah. I love that. One of my interviewees said to me, she said, "Oh, I don't pray for healing. I tell everyone around me, I'm not praying for healing. I'm praying for justice. I'm praying for mercy and grace, and that the world will be a better place. And if you don't want to pray for those things with me, then I don't want to pray with you." I thought that was great.
Yeah. And Sheila, that was the first thing that I thought of when you said that we always now use the term peace with justice. And I suspect that I don't want to put words in your friend's mouth, much less, 50 years ago. But if in fact what she was, my hope is she was saying peace with justice,
Yeah.
and that she was making a certain demand, and certainly as it rings true with you, it rings true with me, that the demand and justice is what she was really talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Anybody else before we call it a day here so Darla can get on with her important business of being the assistant provost at Hollins University?
I'd rather talk to you all, really.
Well, listen, that reminds me of something. Will you come back? I always
I
love
would
to get
love
people.
to come back.
Yeah, it'd be great to have you come back, because there's a lot more, not just with this book, but I know with other work that you're doing that would really be important to
Yeah,
continue the conversation. So please consider it an open one, open invitation to, especially
absolutely.
if you have something you're working on, you say, God, I wonder what those crazy people at Water would think.
I
We,
love
we,
it.
we've done worse than have such sessions. So great, great. Anybody else before we conclude here?
I just want to offer
Diane
a
New.
challenge, I think. These healing narratives, they're so out there. Write something that addresses how they need to be seen or not seen. I think it's really important, Darla, and you're on to some really good stuff.
And Teresa Smallwood's book
Thank
might,
you.
if you, I don't know if you know her book, but her book might help you or not help you, but would give you one ethnographic perspective of somebody who did that within the context of LGBTQ violent
Yeah,
rhetoric. And she actually
yeah,
calls out, and you'd be good at this too, calls out particular offenders, and the damage that this kind of rhetoric does in the pulpit for queer people, and especially for queer kids.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
they're not I'm not suggesting substitution here, but
No, no, but yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. One of the first articles I wrote in graduate school, I co-wrote it with a dear, dear friend who is a Hebrew Bible scholar, Dr. Jennifer Kusid, and it's called Out of the Darkness, Examining the Rhetoric of Blindness in the Gospel of John. But we argue in that paper, we look at John 9, the healing of the man born blind, and we're really critiquing both the ableism and the anti-Semitism in that story. And um, we don't like it, to be very sophisticated about it. Um, and so, yeah, I've done a little bit of writing outside of this book about some of the healing narratives, but not a lot yet. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and other people I think can help by suggesting strategies
Mhm.
for keeping those things out of the lectionaries, for example.
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
one of the strategies that's been used for a long time in liberation work is simply to get people not to use the text. Just,
Yeah,
in addition to calling them out, in addition to the kind of exegetical work, but also just practically speaking, you know what, we're not going to use that one this
yeah,
time.
yeah,
Because I think as much as we may think we can out-talk the texts, just
yeah.
reading them can have a reinforcing impact that I think we want to avoid. So,
Well, and especially on kids
yeah.
who are not developmentally able to think critically about those kinds of issues yet. And I mean, I remember hearing ministers talking about you're blind to the truth and thinking, oh, huh. As a child, now I don't go to church that often. And when I do, if I hear that stuff, I can I can think about it and deconstruct it and then roll my eyes. Um, but for children in particular, I really worry. And like you were saying, Mary, those texts that are so problematic for queer kids and disabled kids. That's where I think we have a very profound responsibility to do better.
One other thing I want to point out, Darla, in your book that I want people to know about is, and it's not, you don't make it a major theme, but it's your deconstruction of communion on
Mm,
several different levels. And I think that section of the book could just be pulled out and used in any introductory theological studies classroom as a
mhm,
way of saying what the problems are here. Not only does the bread wine imagery, the body blood get a little gory, but also you take it to the very clear experiences of how do you get to the elements, how do you receive what happens, who needs help getting there, who needs just a lot of aspects of that I found very, very um, uh, provocative and helpful for seeing that maybe communion isn't such a hot idea after all in a lot of pardon, but don't tell your husband who's an Episcopal
Oh
priest. But
no,
um,
he's used to
I'm
it.
sure I'm sure he's heard all this already. But I mean, it
Yeah,
just seemed to me that one conclusion to say, well, this isn't such a hot idea for
yeah.
doing it so often because of the way in which it functions in that um, dual way of both inviting and repelling, of both
Mhm,
accepting and rejecting. I mean, just
mhm.
and again, some of the things that Teresa Smallwood said, and you might want to listen. I'll send you a link to her talk
Yeah, I would love to.
because one of the things she talked about was, how is it that the very religion that nurtured me and invited me also repels me and rejects me?
Yeah,
And that is that's a lot of people's question about religion.
yeah,
And I think what you do with the communion, both as a sacrament and as a theological teaching, is very, very much on par with that. So,
yeah. I talk
yeah.
about when I talk to Christian church groups, I often use that story and that chapter for the very reasons you're naming. Yeah.
Yeah, I found it very, very helpful.
Thanks.
Listen, we don't want to take any more of your
Yeah,
time. I know somebody's
I
expecting
need
you
to
somewhere.
run, but thank you, thank you. This has been really wonderful for me.
People are waving their hands and saying thank you on the screen.
Great.
And so in fact, why don't we unmute, and if people want to just make a last uh, goodbye to Darla rather than using our hands, why don't we speak for just 1 second? I'll say
Thank
my last thanks and
you.
talk to you soon.
Thanks, Mary.
Anybody else?
Thanks,
Um,
Darla. This is Diane.
thank you so much.
Thanks,
Um,
Darla. This is
Thank
Vera.
you.
Thank you, Darla. This is Virginia Day. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming.
Becky Coakley just said thank you. Go ahead, Becky.
Just from London. Thank you very much, love. Thanks.
From
You're
London. Wonderful to
welcome.
have you. Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Time to go to
Great.
bed, Becky.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There are
All
others, but
right. Take care.
we're closed for now.
everybody.
Happy holidays, everybody. Take good
Happy
care.
Thank
Thanks for being
you.
here. It was great. Really, Darla, splendid, splendid.
Thanks.